I'm really almost overwhelmed by the cover-up of it and by the people I know who participated in that. And I'll just name two of them. One is Bill Barr, who's the two-time Republican Attorney General, whose father, by the way, started Jeffrey Epstein's career. His father, Donald Barr, was a former OSS CIA officer. In the files, I should also say that Jeffrey Epstein describes Bill Barr, the former AG, as, quote, CIA. Jeffrey Epstein privately says this guy's CIA. Bill Barr covered up Epstein's murder. He was clearly murdered in federal detention. Barr said out loud, we got to make sure everyone thinks this is a suicide. So why isn't he being asked about this? And the second is Mike Pompeo. And Mike Pompeo was caught plotting to murder Julian Assange, the head of WikiLeaks. Why is this significant? Well, because it was WikiLeaks that made that first tranche of emails available to the public. And it was Julian Assange who said on camera, basically said, my source, he didn't say this, he didn't say my source, but he heavily suggested in an interview with Dutch television, my source was Seth Rich, the DNC staffer who was found murdered on the street in Washington in a so-called robbery where nothing was taken from him.
Welcome to Truths and Outliers, the show where we unpack the headlines, interrogate the narratives, and explore what's really at stake beneath the sound bites. Today, we're diving deep into a controversy that's shaken public trust, rattled political foundations, and reignited debates about accountability. The Jeffrey Epstein files, the recent revelations, or lack thereof, and the provocative commentary from media figures like Tucker Carlson, who has named what he calls two key individuals in the alleged cover-up. This episode is not just about Epstein. It's about power, secrecy, and what it looks like when public institutions and private influence collide. Before we talk about alleged cover-ups, accusations, or media reactions, we need context, the who and what at the center of it all. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier and convicted sex offender whose life and activities captivated, horrified, and mystified the public for over 2 decades. In the early 2000s, Epstein was investigated for sex trafficking involving minors in Florida. What followed was one of the most controversial plea deals ever, a 2008 agreement that allowed him to plead guilty to lesser state charges, avoid federal prosecution, and serve a relatively short sentence with extensive protections for co-conspirators. The deal was widely criticized as extraordinarily lenient, raising immediate questions. Why was Epstein given such favorable treatment? Who engineered this outcome, and at whose behest? Fast forward to 2019. Epstein was arrested again, this time on federal charges in New York, only to die in custody under circumstances that continue to fuel speculation. But perhaps the most explosive piece of the story didn't fully surface until after his death. The contents of the so-called Epstein files, court documents, affidavits, flight logs, and communications that could reveal names, patterns, and potential complicity. In response to public pressure and legislative action, including the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Department of Justice eventually released a tranche of Epstein-related materials. These documents were supposed to shed light on how his network operated and who might have aided or abetted him. But here's where things get complicated. Yes, thousands of pages were released. Yes, court filings, depositions, and transcripts were made public. But many of these documents were heavily redacted. Pages were blacked out, names were omitted, entire sections were masked. For advocates of transparency, especially victims and their supporters, this was infuriating. The promise of full disclosure was, to many, hollow. Instead of clarity, the public saw obfuscation. And that opened the door to interpretation, speculation, and political commentary. Critics argued that the redactions could be concealing powerful people connected to Epstein. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, possibly even intelligence figures. Supporters of the DOJ's procedural decisions said redactions were necessary to protect ongoing legal considerations, privacy rights, or national security. The truth, as with many things in this case, is layered and contested. Enter one of America's most influential conservative voices, Tucker Carlson. In his commentary, Carlson has made bold claims about who is actually responsible for what he describes as an Epstein cover-up. Specifically, Carlson has named two key individuals he believes are central to understanding why the full contents of the files remain obscured and why certain evidence hasn't seen the light of day. Let's break down those claims, first with the names and then with the underlying assertions. Tucker Carlson has singled out Pam Bondi, who currently serves as U.S. Attorney General. According to Carlson, Bondi's handling of the Epstein files, especially the way she walked back earlier statements about the existence of a client list, suggests a deliberate move to suppress information rather than reveal it. Carlson's argument goes like this. Bondi initially acknowledged that an Epstein client list existed. Subsequently, she reversed course, saying no such list was identified in the files. That reversal, Carlson suggests, isn't innocent. It implies that something was being hidden. This narrative hinges on the idea that the shifting messaging could not be accidental or simple confusion. Instead, it points to intent, that Bondi, knowingly or not, became a gatekeeper of information that could be politically or socially explosive. The second figure, or entity, Carlson references isn't a name on a document. It's an institution, the intelligence services, broadly referring to U.S. and possibly foreign intelligence agencies. Carlson's assertion here is more theoretical than evidentiary. He suggests that the reason sensitive material hasn't been disclosed is that the files implicate intelligence networks, either through Epstein's role as an asset, informant, or a valuable collector of compromising information. In Carlson's telling, exposing this could unravel powerful networks, so the gloves come off when it comes to transparency. Now, whether one agrees with this or not, it's important to note this is a claim rooted in inference rather than documentary evidence. It's media commentary, interpretation, not a court declaration. Let's step back and ask a bigger question. Why does this controversy matter, beyond the personalities involved? This isn't just about Epstein, it's about public trust in the justice system, how power protects itself, the boundaries between secrecy and accountability, the corrosive effect of partial transparency. When documents are released piecemeal with redactions, the public fills in the blanks, often with the most dramatic possible explanations. That's human nature, but it also underscores a structural reality. When institutions resist full openness, they risk fueling conspiracy narratives, even when none exist. On one hand, there's a valid argument for protecting privacy and legal integrity. On the other hand, there's a valid public demand for full disclosure, especially when the subject involves exploitation and abuse. It's important to uplift voices that are too often overshadowed in these debates. The survivors. Many Epstein survivors have said that transparency isn't just about curiosity, it's about justice. They want to know who knew what and when. They want accountability, not redactions. Some have called for independent review boards, public hearings, and unredacted releases. Others have taken to media platforms, congressional testimony, and advocacy campaigns. Their message? This is not just a political story. This is about human lives, and that perspective should always be central to the conversation. Let's talk about the role of the media, including figures like Tucker Carlson, in shaping this narrative. Media commentary exists on a spectrum. On one end, straight reporting, facts, verified information, official documents. In the middle, contextual analysis, informed interpretation, grounded in evidence. On the other end, opinion and speculation, framing events through a particular lens. Carlson's commentary is influential because he reaches millions. When he names individuals, he doesn't just speculate, he assigns responsibility in the public imagination. That's powerful, and with power comes responsibility. The question becomes, when does commentary illuminate truth? And when does it shape belief without sufficient evidence? That's a core tension in the modern information ecosystem. We also cannot ignore the political dimension. The Epstein files controversy has become intertwined with broader partisan narratives about deep state influence, Department of Justice credibility, media trust, political weaponization of information. Different sides interpret the same redactions differently. Some see concealment of power networks, others see cautious legal process. These interpretations reflect broader divides in how institutions are perceived, not just how they operate. Understanding that helps explain why this issue resonates across the political spectrum. So where does that leave us? We've explored the basics of the Epstein files, what has been released and what hasn't, Tucker Carlson's claims about Pam Bondi and intelligence agencies, the distinction between documented fact and media interpretation, why transparency and accountability matter, the voices of survivors demanding justice, and the broader political and media ecosystem shaping the narrative. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Truth is not the same as assertion. Truth requires evidence, verification, and, above all, a commitment to facts over convenience. Thanks for listening to Truths and Outliers. If you found this episode valuable, subscribe, share, and let us know what topics you want us to unpack next. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and most importantly, keep seeking truth.